So today's question comes through from Michaela. We've got a voice note for this one. Thanks for your question.
Hey guys, thanks so much for a great podcast. This is a question from a fellow South African and is directed at Chad in particular. What advice would you give fellow South Africans, young couples, young families who are considering immigrating themselves? I know you're an expat living in the UK, and I'd love your thoughts and advice on what you'd sort of advise young people who are thinking of making that move. And with the current undertone of the political situation in South Africa, I'd love to know what you and Barry are thinking about, what your thoughts are on that. Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your question, Michaela. And this one, not a new topic on our podcast. We've spoken about this a couple of times in different contexts. And I think the reason for it is because it is so topical at the moment. A lot of youngsters looking to move abroad. So in terms of advice, let's certainly delve into that in the first place. I think obviously the first thing is pick a spot. This seems obvious, but I think a lot of people just kind of go to the place that's easiest to get into and then find them not enjoying being there. So look at your options and have a real good look at options. So look at the place that's easier to get into. Look at those that are more appetizing, but maybe a little bit more tricky, and kind of understand the nuances of what it would take to get there. Talking about the UK specifically, just this past week, the details of their points-based immigration system have been released. It's a big document. Haven't had the time to go through it just yet, but that's certainly something to look out for in the future. Certainly have a look at the spot and be realistic about it. I think a lot of the time we're of this view that the grass is always greener, and as like anything else in life, there's always pros and cons. I know a lot of South Africans aside who come here and really just hate it after the first couple of months, and fair enough, it's not a perfect solution, but yeah, have a realistic think about that. Secondly, I'd say certainly have a realistic think about how much cash you'll need to settle down. Now, I would certainly say, whatever your field of profession is, have a chat to some recruiters, get a good feel for how long it's going to take for you to get placed, and make sure you have adequate buffer when you move over. Obviously, rent is one of the biggest expenses aside. If you know people who are already sort of staying here, maybe you can kind of spend a week at each person, just to make it a little bit easier for that first move. I think that'll make a significant difference. Thirdly is obviously just the prep work. So before you've actually decided, okay, cool, now I'm gonna go, you kind of need to make that call of whether this is a short-term thing. Are you coming back in 5 years' time, or is this a permanent move? And why I'd say it's important to do that thinking is in terms of all your stuff, everything that you own. Are you going to rent out a storage facility and hold that for when you do eventually decide to come back? Do you have friends or family who have extra space that they can keep your stuff? Or do you need to kind of go out and sell everything? That takes quite a lot of time. We certainly got a good start fairly early on that. Gumtree is your friend. There's a whole bunch of extra apps in South Africa that are well catered for that. And I certainly found spending a little bit of time actually listing things on those kinds of apps rather than just taking it to a cash converters is going to get you a lot more bang for your buck. As long as you're not sort of stressed for time, you can actually get the right sort of value for your things. And lastly, I'd say on a financial perspective, how are you kind of going to move your money over? So in South Africa, every South African is entitled to a annual discretionary allowance of 1 million rand. So if you fall underneath that bracket, it's all good. But if it's above that, you obviously have to request approval from the Reserve Bank. And so there's obviously extra channels to take there. Also, other things to note is obviously if this is a kind of permanent move over, you've got to look at your tax status. Are you actually ordinarily resident in South Africa? There's been some changes in the tax system in South Africa to enforce course, kind of double taxing really. So certainly look into that. And then in terms of your final tax return, when you do actually move over, one very important thing to note is if you move over, you are deemed to have disposed of all your assets. So even if you keep your assets in South Africa, you're deemed to have disposed of them. So you should actually pay capital gains tax on them. Something to note, and certainly get some advice on that. Those are some of the things that I would think about. Barry, in terms of the undertones and all of those types of considerations that Michaela mentioned, what do you have to add?
Yes, I think those are great tips, Chad. So thank you for those. I think they're very practical and kind of talk to a lot of the practical things you have to think about when you're making this kind of move. I don't have much to add. I just want to add one point, is that this kind of decision is often very emotional, right? So it's an emotional decision that really is quite taxing on people. And so I would just encourage you to think deeply and carefully about why you're making the move, right? I think I see some friends of mine make a mistake sometimes when they're running away from problems, right?
Definitely.
Where they're running away from things and they think that just by going across the world to a different city that those problems inside their head are going to disappear. And that's not the case, right?
Definitely.
Unfortunately, when we travel, we take ourselves with us, right? So you don't get rid of the brain, you don't get rid of the mind. And so psychologically, it's important to do some actual deep internal work to understand why do you want to make this move and what are your reasons for it, and in a non-emotional way. So to be able to sit down and write out, for example. So I think journaling is great for this. To write out examples of why I'm making this move and why this particular city makes sense for me and what my game plan is. And that kind of psychological work is not the sexy stuff. It's very difficult to do. But I think it's very important for someone making this kind of move, because what you don't want to do is, as you say, Chad, get across that side, realize the grass isn't greener there, and then regret the move. So the more work you can do on yourself, understand why you're making the decision, the better chance you have of making a successful move and transitioning successfully into a new society.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about people who sort of run away, I know of people who run away to a different country where English isn't even the main language, with the thought that it's okay, I'll pick it up. Like you said, there's so many problems. I need to just run away with it. And within a month or 2 months, those same people are back on the plane on the way back home. So yeah, definitely that kind of thinking has to happen. And like you said, journaling, such a great tool for that. Across the pond.